Long ball number one, our headlines here on Morning Kick Around. We kick them long, we bring them down. Leading the show, United States men's national team roster was announced yesterday for the January camp. And as is tradition, this camp is populated by domestic-based players.
Yes.
So obviously the conversation happens each and every year, who could make it, who doesn't. Just when you saw this roster put out, was there any names that raised your eyebrows, furrowed your brows? What were your brows doing upon initial examination of the January camp roster?
I don't think that surprise is really part of the equation here because it is January. I mean, this is a camp that's been termed Camp Cupcake in the past.
How do you feel about that? That's pretty derogatory, right?
It is derogatory, but at the same time, I mean, history will tell you there aren't a lot of guys who appear in these camps who either become first team national team players, and there are a couple of examples. I guess that makes it worth it. Although I saw my friend Jeremiah Oshan was writing at Sounder at Heart this morning, and he wrote, maybe it's time to end this camp. Maybe the utility of this camp is not as good as it used to be, because now we're in an era where MLS teams are getting started earlier and earlier. We've got transfers are now part of the story for MLS players in a way that they weren't before. The off season now, the off season for non-playoff teams is still pretty long, but the off season for teams that play deep into the playoffs is pretty short. Like, it's not really that long of an off season. And again, because the camps are starting earlier and earlier into the winter, now you do have questions. So we've seen players miss camps because their teams were like, no, we got to get you ready for Champions League, buddy, or Champions Cup now. We can't let you go off and kick a ball around against, Bosnia and Herzegovina, or in this case, Venezuela and Costa Rica. We need you here. So if that's going to be an issue, if that's going to be part of the equation, then why are we doing this? And okay, so we've got the roster here. And I will tie this back to what Jeremiah was writing at Sounder at Heart in a second, but goalkeepers, Calendar, Freeze, Schulte, Steffen. Sure, why not? Whatever. Again, a lot of this is going to be like, okay, I guess these guys are fine. They're Calendar, I don't think has shown enough progress to make me think he's ever going to be a first 23, 25-man roster national.
Some folks suggesting online that this was an Inter Miami goodwill pick,
because Mauricio Pochettino needs to curry goodwill with Inter Miami. Is that
there's other people in the room on these sort of things, right?
Well, okay, let's make a point that Pochettino asked MLS teams for their cooperation on this camp. Let's also make the point that this camp is happening in Florida. It is nearby. It is very close to where Drake Callender plays his soccer in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. So if he's there and he's been a national team call-up before, get the guy in for some training sessions. Like, this is part of it. Matt Freese had a season worthy of a call-up with NYCFC. Not sure anybody ever sees him reaching the level of national team goalkeeper, but there he is. Schulte and Steffen are different. Obviously, Steffen's got some history with the national team, kind of drifted out, now drifting maybe slightly back in off of his time in Colorado, although I don't think anybody sees him as overtaking Matt Turner for the number one right now, even though Matt Turner is not playing regular minutes at Crystal Palace. Patrick Schulte is one I do think might have a national team first choice goalkeeper kind of path. He's very young by goalkeeper standards, I guess, as is Calendar on some level. But I think the move to Europe needs to happen before we seriously consider Patrick Schulte as a number one candidate. Then you got defenders. Max Arfstad, Columbus Crew. George Campbell, CF Montreal. DeJuan Jones, Columbus Crew. Shaq Moore, FC Dallas, just got traded. Jalen Neal, CF Montreal, just got traded. Tim Reams, Charlotte FC. He's the old wizened veteran. Here's here again. Again, local, right? I mean, local in the sense that he's domestic now. So you're not pulling him away. He wouldn't be in this camp if he wasn't playing in MLS now. Might as well give him a look. Still don't have anybody who's overtaken him as a first choice left-sided center back for the U.S. men's national team. Miles Robinson, FC Cincinnati. All right, there's a ceiling there, but sure. John Tolkien, New York Red Bulls. I mean, the mix of this, and then Walker Zimmerman, again, who's a veteran player, went to a World Cup. Is he really a guy we expect to be in the team in 2026? I don't know.
He's a bit of a forgotten man in my head.
Well, he got injured. I think he's serviceable in certain circumstances. But again, if that's the level of our center backs, then we're kind of in a spot here. What I'll say is you get some lingering veterans who maybe are fringy if lots of injuries happen to the first choice guys. And I would put Robinson and Zimmerman in that camp. Then you have guys who are younger and untested and have not seen a national team camp before, and that's Campbell and that's Neal and that's Tolkien to a certain extent. I think he has one or two caps. John Tolkien, Max Arfston has never seen a national team camp before, right? So you're taking sort of like, I guess you could argue that this is like veteran guys, kind of middle tier guys that maybe aren't national teamers, but why not take a look at them? And then some younger players who could be national teamers in a first choice environment down the road. I think Tolkien probably fits in that group from this group. The rest of them, I don't know. Now, Jackson Reagan is not in this team.
Tell us about Jackson Reagan.
Well, Jackson Reagan was in this team last year, and in the January camp last year. Mm-hmm. He's 6 years old. He was a Defender of the Year finalist in Major League Soccer. He was one of the, he's been one of the best passing center backs in the league. And is he better than George Campbell in my mind? Yes. Is he better than Jalen Neal in my mind? Yes. Is he better than Walker Zimmerman, Miles Robinson, and Tim Ream? Well, that's maybe more debatable, but he is newer in the sense that he's a new face. Now, again, he is 26 years old. And if you're Mauricio Pochettino, you're going to spend time blooding a 26-year-old who's never been a national teamer before when you've got a 22-year-old or a 21-year-old who maybe hasn't reached the level of Jackson Reagan, but certainly has more growth, more room for growth. Jalen Neal is the guy here that would fit that category. So, I mean, again, I don't know if anybody should get too excited or worked up or angry about this roster, but I think you can, just like every single time we see one of these, look at it and go, well, I'm kind of intrigued by that guy. So I'd like to see what he does. Kramaski, Emeka Anelli of Real Salt Lake, Diego Luna, also Real Salt Lake. Again, this is a guy whose national team career so far has been this weird. What's going on here? Why isn't he an Olympic player? What? So he's getting a look. At least there's something there. I don't know what his fit would be with the full national team. Right? If everybody's healthy and playing regular minutes, I'm not sure Diego Luna has a place in the full squad right now. Maybe he makes a European move and changes the equation. Jack McGlynn, Philadelphia Union. Forwards are Patrick Aubameyang of Charlotte, up and coming, had a good season. Is he good enough? I don't think so. Caden Clark, another guy with a weird path through his career. He was at the the Barcelona Residential Academy in Arizona. He's actually from Minnesota. He never played for Minnesota United, but they had his homegrown rights. He ended up with the Red Bulls. Remember, he got sold to Leipzig. Then I think he had like a appendectomy or something. Like he had a medical issue that slowed him down. That's fascinating. Jesus Ferreira, been a national teamer, probably not what anybody thinks of as a first choice forward for the U.S. men's national team, but again, Camp Cupcake, January MLS-based camp. Brian Gutierrez listed as a forward, which I think is interesting. Matko Milovic, who doesn't even have a team right now, just left, I think, Newell's Old Boys in Argentina. Indiana Vasilev, who has had good moments in St. Louis, especially in that first year when they were press crazy and getting turnovers that were gifted to them. And Brian White.
Inexplicable turnovers.
And Brian Wright, who deserves to be in this team. I don't know. I don't get worked up over it. Again, you can maybe think, there's a couple of guys who should be on this team that aren't there, but it's never enough. This is never important enough for me to be offended when players miss out on a January camp, even though for them, it's probably not great, right? For Jackson Reagan, he's probably disappointed that he didn't get a call this time.
Yeah, that's a good shout. And I'd say the only thing that would kind of get my get hot under the collar was if Diego Luna wasn't included somehow. Like if he wasn't in this one, then he would just probably never make a camp.
if Diego Luna scores 3 goals and picks up an assist or 2 in 2 matches against Venezuela and Costa Rica, is that going to make the argument that he should be a full national team player? It maybe makes it slightly
probably
more.
not. I mean, it can't hurt.
It can't hurt him. It can't hurt him.
But we're
That's
gonna
about as far as it goes. That's as far as it goes, Rob.
So this group of players will take on Venezuela at Chase Stadium in Fort Lauderdale on Jan 18th and Costa Rica on January 22nd at Inter and Co Stadium in Orlando, Florida. We will return to the subject at the top of the hour at 10 o'clock for Hot Topic. We're going to discuss which of these groupings of players we're most concerned with and pleasantly surprised with. But